May 30, 2005. Natalee Ann Holloway, an 18-year-old from Alabama, was last seen entering a car outside Carlos and Charlie's nightclub in Ornestad, Aruba. She was with Joran Sloot and the Calpo brothers. What happened next remains unknown. Despite extensive searches, her remains have never been found. The case was closed in December 2007 due to insufficient evidence. In January 2012, Natalee was declared legally dead at her father's request. Nearly 2 decades later, in June 2023, Joran Sloot was extradited to the United States and pleaded guilty to her murder. Yet, many questions still linger. What happened to Natalee Holloway's remains? What details about that night remain unexplained? The mystery of her disappearance continues to haunt those who searched for answers. Natalee Ann Holloway was born in Memphis, Tennessee in 1986. She was the first of 2 children born to Dave and Beth Holloway. Following her parents' divorce in 1993, Natalee and her younger brother Matthew were raised by their mother in Clinton, Mississippi. In 2000, after her mother remarried, the family moved to Mountain Brook, Alabama. There, Natalee graduated with honors from Mountain Brook High School in May 2005. She was involved in extracurricular activities such as the National Honor Society and the school dance squad. She had been accepted to the University of Alabama on a full scholarship, where she intended to pursue a pre-med track. At the time of her disappearance, Natalee's father worked as an insurance agent, and her mother was employed by the Mountain Brook school system. Her mother, Beth Holloway, became a prominent voice in the media after Natalee's disappearance. She later founded the International Safe Travels Foundation and the Natalee Holloway Resource Center to help families of missing persons. Her work has had a lasting impact on those affected by similar tragedies. The night of May 30, 2005 began like any other for Natalee Holloway. But what happened after she left Carlos and Charlie's nightclub would change everything. She was last seen entering a car with Joran Sloot and the Calpo brothers. No one saw her after that. The vehicle drove away, and Natalee vanished. Her disappearance immediately drew international attention. News outlets across the world covered the story, and investigators from multiple countries joined the search. Aruban authorities, the FBI, and even Dutch military personnel were involved in efforts to find her. But despite these efforts, her remains were never located. By December 2007, Aruban prosecutors had closed the case due to a lack of sufficient evidence. No charges were ever filed against Sloot or the Calpo brothers. The mystery of what happened that night remained unsolved for years. What exactly occurred after Natalee entered that car remains one of the most enduring questions of the case. Investigators still do not know what happened to her after that moment. The search for Natalee Holloway quickly expanded beyond the shores of Aruba, drawing in resources and attention from around the world. Local authorities, supported by the FBI, and even Dutch military units, launched one of the most extensive investigations the island had ever seen. Volunteers joined the effort, scanning beaches, forests, and remote areas in the hope of finding some trace of the young woman. Despite the scale of the operation, no remains were ever recovered. The media coverage was relentless, turning a local mystery into a global obsession. For many involved in the search, it became a defining chapter in their careers. But for Natalee's family, it was the beginning of a long and painful journey. By 2007, the case had officially closed in Aruba due to a lack of conclusive evidence, though the search for answers continued. Even as time passed, the question of what happened to Natalee Holloway that night in 2005 remained unanswered, lingering like a shadow over those who had once searched so desperately for her. The disappearance of Natalee Holloway triggered one of the most extensive international investigations in modern history. Within hours of her vanishing, Aruban police, the FBI, and Dutch military personnel joined forces, deploying search teams across the island. Volunteers from around the world arrived, scanning beaches, forests, and neighborhoods for any sign of the missing teenager. The case drew global media attention, with reports dominating headlines in the United States and beyond. Despite months of searching, no remains were ever found. In December 2007, Aruban prosecutors officially closed the case, citing a lack of sufficient evidence. Nearly a decade later, in January 2012, Natalee was declared legally dead at her father's request. The case remained unsolved until 2023, when Joran Sloot, the prime suspect, was extradited to the United States and pleaded guilty to her murder. His confession, made in a proffer letter, marked the first time he admitted to killing Holloway by blunt force trauma. Though the case was officially solved, the location of Natalee Holloway's remains unknown, leaving a final mystery in her story. December 2007. Aruban prosecutors officially closed the case. The decision came after years of investigation, but not a single piece of new evidence had emerged. For the Holloway family, it was a blow they would not forget. No arrests, no charges, no answers. The case had stalled, and with it, any hope of finding Natalee. The frustration was palpable. The family had spent years fighting for justice, pushing for more searches, demanding transparency, but the legal system had reached a point where it could go no further. The case was no longer active. The investigation had reached a dead end. For the public, the closure was equally disappointing. The media had covered every detail, every lead, every theory. The world had watched as one of the most high-profile disappearances in modern history played out in real time. And yet, the mystery remained unsolved. The case had been put to rest, but the questions remained unanswered. On January 20th, 2012, Natalee Holloway was officially declared legally dead at the request of her father. The decision marked the end of a long and painful search for answers. For nearly a decade, her family and investigators had pursued every lead, every possibility, in hopes of finding the truth. But with no body, no conclusive evidence, and no further breakthroughs, the legal system had no choice but to move forward. The declaration was not a resolution, but a necessary step. It allowed the family to begin the process of closure, even as the questions surrounding Natalee's final moments remained unanswered. Her father, who had spent years fighting for justice, now faced the reality that the case would not be solved in the way he had hoped. The legal process had come to an end, but for the Holloway family, the search for peace was only just beginning. Joran van der Sloot was one of the last people seen with Natalee Holloway outside a nightclub in Oranjestad on the night she disappeared. His presence in the case immediately placed him at the center of one of the most scrutinized investigations in modern history. In the days and weeks that followed, van der Sloot made conflicting statements about Holloway's fate, including claims that she had died on the morning of her disappearance. These statements were inconsistent with one another and with the available evidence, deepening the mystery surrounding her vanishing. Over time, van der Sloot retracted many of his earlier claims, adding to the confusion and frustration of investigators. His shifting accounts complicated the pursuit of justice, leaving many questions unanswered. He became a prime suspect in the case, though no charges were ever filed in Aruba due to insufficient evidence. The case remained open for nearly a decade before van der Sloot was extradited to the United States in 2023. There, he pleaded guilty to charges linked to Holloway's disappearance and admitted to her murder in a proffer letter. His confession, though long delayed, finally provided a resolution to a case that had lingered for nearly 2 decades. Yet, the details of what happened to Holloway's remains remain unknown. Over the years, Joran van der Sloot provided conflicting accounts of what happened to Natalee Holloway. At times, he claimed she died the morning of May 30, 2005, and that an associate disposed of her body. These statements were later retracted or denied, further confusing the investigation. For nearly 2 decades, his shifting narratives left authorities and the public grasping for answers. In 2023, van der Sloot finally confessed to killing Holloway in a proffer letter. He admitted to using blunt force trauma as the cause of death. This confession came after years of contradictory claims, adding a final, definitive statement to a case long shrouded in uncertainty. Despite his eventual admission, the details of that night remain fragmented. What led to the confession? What had changed over the years? The inconsistencies in van der Sloot's statements continue to raise questions about what truly happened to Natalee Holloway. On June 8, 2023, Joran van der Sloot arrived in the United States under a federal arrest warrant. His extradition was tied to charges of extortion and wire fraud, both linked to the disappearance of Natalee Holloway. But what followed in court was something no one had expected. In a proffer letter, van der Sloot admitted to killing Natalee Holloway. He described the method as blunt force trauma. This was the first direct admission of guilt in a case that had remained unsolved for nearly 2 decades. The confession came after years of conflicting statements, dead ends, and a lack of physical evidence. It marked a turning point in an investigation that had stalled since 2007. For the first time, there was a clear, unambiguous account from someone directly involved in the events of May 30, 2005. What happened to Natalee Holloway's remains unknown. But for the first time, the case had a name, a face, and a voice from the person who took her life. In June 2023, Joran van der Sloot pleaded guilty to killing Natalee Holloway in a proffer letter submitted during his trial in the United States District Court for the Northern District of Alabama. He admitted to committing the murder by blunt force trauma. However, The exact location and circumstances of the crime were not fully disclosed. His confession was part of a deal to secure a reduced sentence for unrelated charges of extortion and wire fraud. Over the years, Sloot had made conflicting statements about Holloway's fate, including claims that she died on the morning of her disappearance and that her body was disposed of by an associate. Many of these statements were later retracted or denied, adding to the uncertainty surrounding the events of May 30, 2005. Despite his guilty plea, key details about the crime remain unverified. Investigators still do not know where Holloway's remains are or what happened in the hours after she was last seen. Even with Joran Sloot's 2023 confession, the precise events of May 30, 2005 remain unclear. He admitted to killing Natalee Holloway by blunt force trauma, but details about what happened after she entered the car that night are still unknown. The location where the crime occurred has never been confirmed, and the fate of her remains continues to elude investigators. Sloot has provided conflicting accounts over the years. At one point, he claimed Holloway died the morning of her disappearance, but later retracted that statement. His shifting narratives have only deepened the mystery. Despite the confession, no physical evidence has been found to corroborate his account. Searches of the area around Carlos and Charlie's and other possible locations have yielded nothing. The lack of remains, combined with the unresolved sequence of events, leaves many questions unanswered. Even with the legal resolution of the case, the truth of that night remains elusive. The investigation into Natalee Holloway's final hours continues to challenge authorities more than a decade after her disappearance. Over nearly 2 decades, the search for Natalee Holloway's remains has spanned beaches, forests, and the depths of Aruba's waters. Teams from Aruba, the FBI, and international volunteers combed the island using ground-penetrating radar, sonar, and even trained dogs. Yet, no trace of her body has ever been found. The absence of physical evidence remains one of the most perplexing aspects of the case. Despite multiple arrests and years of investigation, no forensic link between any suspect and Holloway's fate was ever uncovered. The case, which once dominated headlines worldwide, left behind more questions than answers. Even after Joran Sloot's 2023 confession, the location of Natalee Holloway's remains remains unknown. The search for her body continues, not just for closure, but as a piece of the puzzle that still eludes investigators. Beth Holloway did not stop searching for answers after Natalee disappeared. In the years that followed, she transformed her grief into action, founding the International Safe Travels Foundation to help others avoid similar fates. She also created the Natalee Holloway Resource Center, a place where families of missing persons could find support and guidance. Her voice became a powerful force in personal safety advocacy, speaking at events and in the media to keep Natalee's story alive. Even as the case moved through legal and investigative processes, she remained a constant presence, ensuring the world did not forget. Through the emotional toll of years of searching, Beth continued to push for justice, believing that every effort brought her closer to the truth. Her work not only kept Natalee in the public eye, but also raised awareness about missing persons and the importance of vigilance. Despite the pain, she refused to let the case fade. For Beth Holloway, The search was never just about finding her daughter. It was about making sure no one else would disappear without answers. In June 2023, Joran van der Sloot confessed to killing Natalee Holloway, bringing a measure of closure to a case that had lingered for nearly 2 decades. Yet, even with his admission, the location of Natalee's remains remains unknown. The details of what happened to her after that night in Oranjestad continue to elude investigators. Her family and the public are left with questions that have no answers. The confession, while significant, does not resolve the mystery of where her body is, nor does it fully explain the events of that fateful evening. For many, the absence of physical evidence leaves a haunting void. The search for Natalee's remains continues, but the truth of what happened to her remains just out of reach. As of 2024, the case of Natalee Holloway is officially considered solved following Joran van der Sloot's confession to her murder. In a proffer letter submitted in 2023, he admitted to killing her by blunt force trauma. Yet, despite this confession, the location of Natalee Holloway's remains unknown. The case, once one of the most publicized in modern history, now stands at a point of legal resolution, but with lingering questions. Investigators have not located her body, and the details of her final moments remain unconfirmed. For the Holloway family, the confession brought some closure, but the absence of physical evidence continues to leave a void. The search for answers, though legally concluded, is far from over. Beth Holloway's advocacy through the International Safe Travels Foundation has helped raise awareness about personal safety and support for families of missing persons. The international media attention surrounding Natalee Holloway's disappearance has left a lasting impact, highlighting the global reach and emotional weight of missing persons cases. Nearly 2 decades after her disappearance, Natalee's story continues to resonate, serving as a reminder of the impact of missing persons cases and the importance of justice. Her legacy lives on through the efforts of those who continue to seek answers and support others in similar situations. Subscribe if you want the next case broken down the same way.